So I've had a few of my followers reach out and ask for my opinion on a topic that's been making the rounds in the news in the past couple of weeks. And I thought it was good time to finally get around to answering that. So in case you missed it, there's new legislation that's been proposed and passed under the National Defense Authorization Act. Now, there's a bunch of provisions in that act, but one of the key provisions is regarding Selective Service, sometimes called the draft. And there's two interesting changes regarding that I want to discuss with y'all as they're pretty significant. Now, let's be clear. While the legislation has passed somewhat, it has not been passed into law, and I'll talk about that briefly. You see, Congress has two different parts. There's the House and the Senate. And each individual entity has passed their own version of the National Defense Authorization Act. And the provisions that I'm going to discuss aren't in both versions of those bills. In fact, they're separate and distinct. Let's talk about the House bill first, which did indeed pass on June 15th, which had a provision in it which would automatically enroll men between the ages of 18 and 26 for selective service. Now, this really isn't that much of a change, as men have been required to enroll for selective service since 1980. Now, supporters of that provision are courting it as no big deal, since men are indeed already required to sign up. To quote one congresswoman who said, "By using available federal databases, the Selective Service Agency will be able to register all individuals," notice how she didn't say men, by the way, "and thus ensure that any future military draft is fair and equitable." Now, I don't know about you, but hearing that statement certainly caused me to raise my eyebrows, because it shows the level of data that the government is collecting on us as individuals. But I'll save that for another video. If we're being fair, the truth is it really doesn't change much for men. In a sick sort of way, it actually protects them, as any man who failed to register for selective service, aka the draft before, could be charged with a crime. They could face up to 5 years in prisons, and potentially up to $250,000 in fines. Not to mention be barred from working in government jobs, receiving student loans, and in some states, even being able to get a driver's license. Oh, and lest we forget this key part of it, they can also lose their right to vote. Or to put it another way, to have any say or input into electing officials who might be the ones that conscript them and force them to go fight in wars and get maimed or even killed. Now, as I said, the bill did pass the House on June 15th and was sent over to the Senate, where it's gone nowhere. And why is that? Well, because the Senate has their own version of the bill, which has an interesting little provision of its own. And what is that provision? Well, it's to finally bring about equality for the sexes by requiring women to also register for the draft, just like men have been forced to do for over 40 years now. It is something that is long overdue in the fight for equality, and I believe it should be passed. But will it? I'm going to bet no, because I believe this is nothing more than your standard blustering in an election year to appease not men, who politicians don't give two hoots about, but women. Because you see, it's largely the women's groups who are spearheading this issue. Heck, the ACLU has even taken up the cause, arguing that not requiring women to register and potentially be drafted is an example of overt sexual discrimination. And while it pains me to ever agree with anything the ACLU does, in this particular case, I couldn't agree more. Women should indeed be required to register for selective service and potentially be drafted. And failing to do so, they should suffer the very same penalties that any man would. But I'll even go a step further. Should, God forbid, a war start and the draft be reinstated, I think women should not only be drafted, but sent to the front lines. You see, contrary to Senator Josh Hawley, who openly stated he would never allow his daughters to be drafted, as if there's any risk to any senator's children of ever actually being drafted, I believe in what women have said for decades now, that they can do anything men can do. I believe that women are every bit as capable as men of going off to war and facing the very same risks and horrors that men face. I believe women are every bit as capable as men of being forced to fight for causes they might not even agree with, of taking on the risk of losing a limb or being maimed for life, of potentially facing a future where they suffer from mental issues and PTSD through no fault of their own, or God forbid, losing their lives as men have 99% of the time when it comes to the casualty rate. Honestly, I think it's about time that women stepped up and did their fair share and stopped doing the bare minimum. And for those of you who say that it would decrease unit efficiency or the military's abilities, as many have claimed, I say hogwash. Women have served in the military for many years now in many roles, and not just the U.S. military, but in countries around the world. And if it really is that much of a concern, there's a simple solution. Create segregated combat units. Create women-only infantry and armor divisions, for example. Let those women have the opportunity to show, as they've always declared, that they can indeed do anything men can do. And I'll go even further. It's time we address the historical sexism that men should do all the fighting, which, as I said before, has led to men being 99% of the casualties in war. We talk about statistics all the time and how we need to make things fair. Well, it's time we brought equality to that statistic. Much like women have fought and argued and said that they should hold at least half the spots in boardrooms and management, they should also hold half the spots in coffins that are being sent home from the front lines. It's long past time we righted that wrong and let women have the very same opportunities that men have had. It's time we change that overt sexist belief that has denied women the opportunity to indeed defend their country. It's time we allowed women the opportunity to go and fight on the front lines. In fact, they should replace the men fighting on the front lines, who should be sent to the rear areas and put into support roles, just like women have done for decades now. This isn't about revenge or getting back at women, which many will claim. It's about equality and fairness, which is what we've all been fighting for, right?